Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this ReadyGamingTech.com video, we're going to be discussing as well as analysing tech news, which as usual has popped up in the past 24 or so hours. Hopefully you're having an amazing day. We have an awful lot of news to get through in this particular video, and I'd like to start things out with the I9-10900K, which of course is part of Intel's Comet Lake lineup, which will launch later this year. We have some benchmarks thanks to Firestrike, and we have several results of the I9-10900K, which Rogame on Twitter has compiled and pitted against the Ryzen 9 3900X. And the reason that the 3900X is such an important comparison is because we can probably expect these CPUs to be quite close to one another in pricing. Although one thing that makes it a little bit more ambiguous is that Intel are allegedly going to be implementing price cuts in the second half of this year, and it makes it even weirder because even later in the year it looks like it's going to be probably Q3 to Q4, the next generation of Ryzen 4000 featuring the Zen 3 microarchitecture will launch. Anyway, now that I've got that out of the way, how well does the I9-10900K do? Well, the answer is pretty well. Yes, the 3900X does slightly edge it out in these benchmarks with the physics tests and the CPU scores, but honestly, it's kind of interchangeable, given that the I9-10900K is potentially leaving a little bit of performance on the table with slightly lower clock frequency on the RAM. For example, we see 26666, which who knows how well that will scale on the I9-10900K with faster RAM. We do know that Ryzen is much more dependent on faster RAM compared to Intel, but maybe with additional threads it would make a difference, we don't know. Plus maybe as well with a more updated BIOS we could see slightly improved performance, but honestly I don't expect it to drastically change. So at least in gaming and this particular benchmark and others we've seen as well over the past several days, the I9-10900K looks like it's making a pretty decent case for itself up against AMD's 12 core, I was about to say 12 thread offerings. I'm actually doing a video, I've actually finished it other than some small tweaks here and there, with Intel and their CPU roadmap over the next couple of years and how they're going to be comparing against AMD, particularly now that I've gotten yet more information about Zen 3. So I'll be putting that video out hopefully in the next couple of days. So if you are interested in that stuff, then definitely subscribe to the channel /check back. But long story short, Comet Lake is definitely not going to win against AMD when it comes to sheer horsepower with applications which scale across a whole bunch of threads. So, for example, if you're building a system which is going to be, for, let's say, 3D rendering, that type of thing, then the 3950X, for example, is going to be the pinnacle of performance. But if you are looking to do high refresh rate gaming and, that's kind of more your thing, Intel will probably have a slight advantage, but it's probably not going to be that big of a deal. And honestly, I have said this once and I'll say it a million more times, it's really going to come down to what Intel can do with the pricing of the 10th generation series. And there's actually some interesting news regarding the sales figures of AMD as well, and the receiving of this information from AMD's marketing department. You kind of get emailed out every quarter, as obviously the company wishes to boast how well it's doing. So I actually received this information as I was finishing the Intel versus AMD video, so I just want to add that into the video for the sake of completeness. But I will plonk it on screen here and you can see how well AMD have done. And they are definitely encroaching on Intel's sales. If you look at the desktop, for example, they have increased their margins. And I'm going to read this out verbatim. AMD-powered laptops from major OEMs increased by 50% in 2019, helping drive AMD notebook share. Thanks to the strength of the powerful new processors launched in the Q4, like the 3950X, as well as the third generation Threadripper processors, AMD moved shares up to 0.3% share point over quarter. and the ramp of the second generation EPYC processors, launched in mid-2019, has been significantly faster than the first generation thanks to performance and TCO advantages over the competition. This in turn has helped drive share gains for the AMD servers, and yeah, AMD are doing pretty well. I think some people expected their market share to be a little bit higher than this, but I'm not surprised, honestly. It's going to take time for some people to kind of just accept that AMD are a really good competitor, and I know that to some people that are listening to that, they're just like baffled, but there is definitely like this, I don't know how to describe it other than a certainty with Intel products, which even despite all the security issues that Intel have faced recently, you have to take into consideration on the data center a lot of stuff is optimized for Intel processors, and on the desktop as well, you just have that sheer brand awareness of Intel. And yeah, I think AMD are doing pretty well overall, so it's going to be fascinating to see how all of this comes together. And I do realize I'm kind of glazing over this stuff, but it's because I do go into it much deeper in the Intel versus AMD video, so I don't want to kind of tread over old ground a couple of times in a row. But with that said, let's move over to the next topic. And here we're going to predominantly focus our attention on the Xbox, although it will also inevitably cover some stuff for the PlayStation. So Phil Spencer believes that Amazon and Google are the main competitors going forward in the gaming space. This was actually a statement which was released to Protocol, and I'm going to read down verbatim. When you talk about Nintendo and Sony, we have a ton of respect for them, but we see Amazon and Google as the main competitors going forward. That's not to disrespect Nintendo or Sony, but the traditional gaming companies are somewhat out of position. I guess you could try to recreate Azure, but we've invested tens of billions of dollars in the cloud. I don't want to fight over the format wars with the guys, while Amazon and Google are focusing how to get gaming to 7 billion people around the world. Ultimately, that's the goal, end quote. And, well, he kind of has a point. I am clawing my way to, keep away from cloud gaming as much as possible in general. I still like local gaming, and I don't think it's going to be going anywhere anytime soon. But, inevitably, there is a lot of benefits to cloud gaming, especially as internet infrastructures over the next several years become more robust and faster. I would also, honestly, and this is slightly off topic, consider putting Nvidia into this category, particularly with what's going on with GeForce now, right? Now, that was a terrible sentence, but it's actually looking very robust. You could spend like $5 a month and get streaming with RTX-enabled experiences, and it looks really cool. I might test it out in my own time when possible, but it looks really good, and people are kind of giving it rave reviews and saying that it's really kicking Google Stadia in the shin right now. Either way, Microsoft are building an ecosystem, and it's not just like, oh, we've got the Xbox. They are definitely looking to kind of expand, and this is why I've said multiple times that while Xbox is an important part of Microsoft's plan, it's not the only part of Microsoft's plan. And there is a reason that Microsoft basically will give you Windows for free nowadays. It's because they want you as a customer in their ecosystem. And honestly, they don't care if you're playing Gears of War or Halo or whatever via the Xbox. They don't care if you're doing it via your phone. They don't care if you're doing it via your PC, via your TV, or whether you're on the toilet and somehow playing it on your toilet roll. They honestly do not care. All they do care about is that you are in their ecosystem. And to me, it's quite interesting because it actually made me think of an article that was doing the rounds just over a year ago now, funnily enough. It was actually from Nintendo. And what basically the president of Nintendo said, this was according to Eurogamer, who did translation via the Nikkei, that basically Nintendo aren't fixated on consoles. At the moment, we're offering a uniquely developed Nintendo Switch and its software, and that's based on how we deliver the Nintendo experience. That being said, technology changes, and we'll continue to think flexibly, how we deliver that experience as time goes on. and it's been over 30 years since we started developing consoles. Nintendo's history goes back even further than that. Although, through all of the struggle that they faced, the only thing that they could thought about was what to make next, and in the long term, perhaps our focus as a business could be to shift away from home consoles. Flexibility is just as important as ingenuity. And when you think about it, I think Nintendo shifting eventually to software may make sense. And they could obviously distribute that through the likes of Xbox Cloud or whatever. And that's not to say they will go that route. Honestly, I don't think this is going to be tomorrow. Let's just put it that way, because quite frankly, the Switch is selling extremely well right now, and it is also appealing no matter what format you prefer. So if you're a PC gamer, you're a PlayStation gamer, an Xbox gamer, you can make a very compelling argument that the Switch is an excellent companion console to any of those solutions. But in the long term, well, things could be very different. So, we're done, right? That's the video finished? Well, actually, no, there's a couple of very interesting stories floating around concerning Microsoft, but the one that really intrigues me actually concerns, well, upscaling of textures. And this was from PlayFab founder James, who is actually working as general manager of the team. And by the way, Microsoft acquired PlayFab back in 2018. Now, the reason I find this so interesting is because this company provides tools for the back end of games, and primarily through the cloud. But he said that according to the research that Microsoft have been conducted internally, they are attempting to use, that is Microsoft, machine learning to upscale textures in real time. And according to his information anyway, the results are incredibly impressive, to the point where low-resolution textures could literally be shipped and then upscaled on the fly with very little difference, if any, to shipping with high-resolution textures, which has obviously numerous benefits, including the fact that, well, you don't need such a large amount of storage space. I'm going to read out his quote verbatim. One of the studios inside Microsoft has been experimenting with using ML, machine learning models, for asset generation. It's working scarily well, to the point we're looking at shipping really low-res textures and having ML models up-res the textures in real time. And you can't tell the difference between the hand-authored high-resolution textures and machine-scaled low-resolution textures, to the point where you may as well just ship the low-resolution textures and let the machine do it on the fly. Like, literally not having to ship a massive 2K by 2K textures. You can just ship a tiny texture. The download is way smaller, but there's no appreciable difference in image quality. Think of it more like a magical compression technology that's really magical. It takes a huge R&D budget. I look at things like that and say, either this is going to be the next hard thing to compete on, hiring data scientists for game studios, or it's a product opportunity. We could be providing technologies like this to everyone to level the playing field. In this case, it only works by training the models on very specific sets, one genre of game, and there's no universal texture map. That would be magical. It's more like if you train on a specific textures, it works on those as well, but it wouldn't work for an entirely different set. It's good for photorealism because it adds tons of data, but it may not work so well with, say, a fantasy art style. My point is, though, that that's the technology now. The games development has always been hard in terms of the sheer number of disciplines you have to master. Art, physics, geometry, UI, psychology, all of those things you have to master. And where I come at it, at the heart, Microsoft is a productivity company. Our employee badge says on the back, the mission's company is trying to help people achieve more. How do we help developers achieve more? Well, that's what we're trying to figure out. I would be very interested to see how this is actually being implemented in the next generation Xbox. Like, is there some technology which facilitates this to run even faster and with better quality? Unfortunately, one of the issues right now is we know very little regarding the architecture of the next generation Xbox. We know some stuff. We think it's got 56 compute units. We believe it's based on the second generation of RDNA. and we believe it's around 12 T-flops. This is from multiple different reports, of course. We're kind of piecing this stuff together. But what we don't know is, well, first of all, the nuances of RDNA 2, and secondly, what custom changes that Microsoft have asked to be implemented on the Xbox Series X GPU, and also whether any of this really pertains to the Xbox Series X or whether it can be done on largely any GPU. So it's going to be really interesting to me how all of this comes together with the Xbox. There's also a rather interesting tweet from Paul Tassi, who is a journalist over at Forbes. According to what he's been hearing anyway through the grapevine, I'll read this verbatim. Interestingly, in contrast, the vibe I'm hearing from Sony lately is the Series X has them on the back foot, as it likely has the power edge and they're concerned about its potential price. Hence why they're waiting to announce. This, by the way, is in response to yesterday, where basically Sony have said that they find pricing rather difficult at the moment and they're kind of waiting to see what Microsoft does. And you can argue much the same thing for the last generation. Sony were almost playing a game of chicken with Microsoft. They were waiting to see which of them would kind of like blink first, and then obviously the other one can respond accordingly. In last generation, as most people would agree, Microsoft really just didn't have a good hand to play. This time, though, it's very different, and Microsoft certainly seemed to have a good console. Now, whether it's faster than the PlayStation, it's not necessarily relevant in a way, and I know some people are going to say, of course it is, but in a way it isn't, because the fact of the matter is, both of these consoles are going to be really powerful systems for A, and for B, they also are going to be much closer than what they were. And honestly, I think it's going to be down to the games a lot. And one of the things that I would say for the last generation is Microsoft just, for the first couple of years, they just didn't really have enough to compete against Sony. One of the quotes which really strikes me is that after E3 2019 finished, Phil Spencer said that they actually had more games that they just didn't show, and it was the first time they'd been in this position where they felt that they could actually hold games back because their lineup was already so strong. So it kind of shows that they do have an awful lot of titles in the pipeline, and obviously that was last E3. With that said, though, I certainly don't think Sony is going to be, let's just say, wanting with the exclusives. So this time around, I'm essentially saying that both companies are going to be very impressive, and I will be extremely interested to see what the lineup of games is going to be, not only for launch, but also, let's say, for the next 6 months after the consoles are released. I think that it's going to be really interesting, and I think that this time around it's going to be a lot harder for people to choose whether they're going to be buying Microsoft or Sony. And I also wouldn't be surprised if people switch allegiances. So someone who, for example, bought Microsoft last time jumped to Sony, and someone who was a Sony fan jumps to Microsoft. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens with the next generation. With all of that said, though, hopefully you have enjoyed the video. If you have, then of course the normal stuff: like, share, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.